Everybody to our board meeting in public. I think we may have one member of the public here, so welcome. And we normally have, as I think you all know, we normally have it the other way around, so apologies. You're going to be sort of six behind us. But you're very welcome anyway. Yes. Is that better for you? Yeah, you're very welcome. Okay. Saves me pricking my neck as well.
It just looks rude with our fancy stuff.
I do, I think so too. Okay, so first of all, apologies for absence.
Alison, Bridget Pyle and Caroline.
Lovely, and any interest to declare over and above what we normally have declared for each member of the board?
No declarations of interest.
Okay, so just to remind everybody, obviously our link of registers of interest, managing conflict of interest is on our website, and I will go to ensure that it is absolutely up to date and it is change. Okay, so minutes of the meetings held on the 27th of June and the 11th of July. So I'm going to start with the 27th of June. So if I just get my paperwork. Okay, so this was the one that was held at the forum on the 27th of June. So just first of all, for accuracy, pages 1 and 2, pages 3 and 4. 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, and 11. Any other further actions from that? What other things that arise? So are you happy to approve those minutes? Yep. Okay, and then going on to the 11th of July, I can't see my apologies for that one, so I think this is the one that Stuart chaired.
Okay.
Can I just add that? Are they? Yeah, I missed it. Okay, lovely. Okay. So pages 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. So obviously I can see that Stuart actually we had less discussion when Stuart does it. So, okay, no, it was a very busy meeting. Anything in terms of accuracy or points of order, any matters arising, are you happy to approve it? Thank you very much. Okay, now on to the action log, which we've got a copy of. So there are 3 that are open, aren't there? The needs analysis, so that's the first one. Now that was for today, but I understand that's now been. Is that right?
Yes.
This is the public health.
Only public health paper till November.
Okay.
So Jim, it is done, and we have met and agreed some areas of priority. Actually, about 9 different areas. Richard's not here today, but both Richard and myself and the public health consultant, we've all been involved in that. So we are going to start enacting some of that anyway. Some of it will come to the clinical exec committee before the next board, but Jim wasn't able here to present, so we thought it was best to go till November. So it's not delayed, but we will bring it for public discussion.
So just to be clear, item 6 is therefore deferred until November.
It is.
Okay, fine. Okay. The next one, which is around the resolution of sexual health services, which is still recorded as open, but is there anything else to say?
No, I've got Nicholas.
Sorry.
I've got a meeting diarised with Public Health. They've got a new sexual health lead that's taken over last month, so I'm due to meet with them to review the risks of the service. So I'll update at the next board meeting.
Okay. I mean, I think it is important just to note that I've had several representations from AGPs who are still really concerned about the provision and the way in which it's being organised, and I do think that we should record that for the minutes, because I think that is. Yeah, Daniel, do you want to answer that?
We have them come to our locality in St Albans, because obviously I raised some concerns. I think I think we should still note those concerns, and we should still ask the right questions. I think what I quite liked the look of was their online provision. Okay. My concern about that, it seems to be capped as a certain number per day that's allowed. So I do still, then, although it looks quite good, if it's capped and they're running out of being able to offer enough tests online, then still it goes back to actually are they going to travel longer distances to get their testing.
More clarification.
Yeah, but I think the online online service, I was reasonably impressed with the look of it, at least. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Rami, sorry.
Sorry, this has been also raised at LMC levels because there is substantive concerns. It's not just a few, but there is actually substantive concerns about the fact that there is a reduction which they hope primary care or PCNs will be able to take up, which they are not actually equipped or in a position to do so, and there's an assumption there of another service taking the slack. There's also been a reduction in public health general payments, which has made it less cost effective for certain primary care and PCN services to do. I think we just need to join it up. We need to actually have a plan and a way forward that doesn't mean that people get disabled, because at the end of the day, if we don't have these services, we are far more likely to end up with unwanted pregnancies, which is going to be a disaster.
Yep, Daniel.
Well, I think so that's so there's the sexual transmission infection testing, which is I was talking about. Rami is talking about their access now to long-acting reversible contraception and contraception provisions, and I do share the concern about A, the capacity in primary care to pick up the slack, and B, actually access to training is quite difficult as well, quite expensive and quite lengthy. So I think the capacity issues there is a real risk.
So just to clarify, the issue about training, of course, is that if people aren't trained, they're not there as a workforce to be able to deliver a service, even if actually they're more geared up and want to do it, which I think is some of the pushback that I've had from people informally. Okay, so AK Lynn, so
Yep,
you're going
that's
to use those
helpful.
comments and
Thank you.
we'll move forward. Okay, thank you. And the last one, which is still open, which is the BAF, making sure that all board and committee papers are clearly addressing the risk, which I would hope that we will reflect at the end of today has been the case. And I know that Katie has been invited to team meetings, which I think have been going through July, August and into September. Is there anything else to add on that, Rod?
I suppose we as a management team, we've completed that action. We'll continue to focus in that way. So I propose that it is closed.
Yes.
Now that we've noted that.
Absolutely. Okay.
So I don't think it should be.
Lovely. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. So before I go on to item 5, which is the questions received prior to from members of the public, can I just check? I don't normally say it at the beginning, but is anybody actually recording the proceedings? Just so that we're aware. Okay. Other than ourselves, where we do put it on the website. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so any questions, Rod?
There were no questions received. Actually, there was one from Brian Gunson who couldn't be with us today, but we're addressing that
Okay,
offline.
lovely. Okay. Okay, moving on to what would the next item, as I said, has been moved to November. So it's over to Catherine for your CEO's report. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just take people through everybody through some of the highlights in the document with the work that we've been undertaking since we last met, which to be fair, I think most of the board probably relatively cited on quite a lot of these strategically, particularly around the role of the development of our integrated care system and the ICP. So as we know, we've had a number of development sessions with Watford hospitals, but also as an exec team, and Nicholas and myself have also been attending a number of development sessions with CEOs and chairs across not only the SDP but also our local ICP and the West of Herts development. So those are progressing well. We do obviously have papers for discussion later today as well, and actually our plan is to talk about these more in a finite position in the public domain on October as we finesse those plans and move towards more of a launch. I think obviously we have already touched on some of the delivery vehicles that sits behind it, and as we know in July we talked about the local delivery plans at a board and how we're enacting some of the changes across our provider system. So in reality, this is more about the architecture that sits behind it in line with the long-term plan deliverables, and I think as a board we're going to be having many more conversations about this over the next 12 months as we move into shadow ICP arrangements, and then as we would hope formal ICP and ICS arrangements from April 2021. As an exec team, I think we're spending a lot of time in the development of that, many of us, as well as the delivery of programmes of work. We haven't actually, since we last met, we've had a few of our year-end assessments in, so we've just provided those for visibility there. Clearly one of those is the NHS England final CCG rating, which was good. We've also had patient involvement under the new regulatory framework, which was also good, and actually on day-to-day practice and governance we were rated as outstanding. And then also we've had all of the year-end account submissions and opinions, which you'll see noted in my report. So all in all, a very clean bill of health and positive external review of what the CCG does. I've also then noted where we are on the Cambridge and Peterborough position. People will be cited, and we had a public discussion about that also some months ago. There are now arrangements in place for oversight across all the STPs in line with the regional ask to support that system. We haven't had the confirmation around that the money will be returned in 2021, but as we know, all other partners have agreed to split that proportionally, should that be the case. So just for your information, if that was the case for the CCG, that would be at a cost to this CCG of 2.036 million out of 5, which is our proportional amount. And then just to run through some of the operational areas, some of which we'll obviously discuss today, but just to bring to your attention, and from a BAF perspective, we do and have talked about the risks that sit with the provision and delivery of CYPCC, which you'll see noted in my report. We are heavily focused on that. In fact, Di and I are still on weekly delivery conference calls at the moment in order to be able to manage that risk and quality of provision. We are taking over the commissioning functions as we're required to do from the 1st of October, and actually we're working on enhancing the current provision arrangements, and we'll be doing some further engagement with families probably into January, post-Christmas, I think, as we just develop that further. But I think good progress has been made. There's still a lot to do, but actually we are on track with our plans and in line with the mitigations that we have documented in our BAF. I should just obviously note we've also just the strategic outline case for Watford hospitals. You will have seen a updated communications yesterday that Christine and I issued out in response to some documentation that's been issued by the regulators, and also in line with the legal claim that's underway at the moment. So we'll continue to work with our lawyers on that response. We don't know a date for when that pre-action JR will be heard, but we are expecting that to be relatively soon. So obviously update the board as we know more. Primary care, obviously a significant amount continues underway. We do spend a lot of time and continue to do so around the development of primary care, and as we've talked about in the past, particularly around the development of PCNs. I think that is being well received, whilst also recognising that we still have a lot to do to support practices and also clinical leads, clinical directors in their new role, and how that will develop over time. We have done a number of meet and greet sessions and training and development sessions, which also includes clinical pharmacists, which is the first time we got all of that team together, although not a team itself, a virtual team in a sense, and there was 11 clinical pharmacists attending, so I know we had a good discussion with them, and actually they want to continue to develop that as a network, which is similar to what we do around nurses and all other disciplines within primary care. So I think time well spent. So we will, there's a variety of different things underway. The development programme will continue, and effectively sort of service development programme, and also organisational development programme with those the variety of those roles. I also just make note that we have completed and signed off next year's, or this, well, it's actually year 2 of the commissioning of the ECF, the Enhanced Commissioning Framework. It starts in November, although that's just because of when the first year started, which always is a bit bizarre, but actually we're going to align the scheme to be in related to the financial year, and that's been through our Primary Care Committee and extensively engaged, and obviously we spent a lot of time at DP4 the week before last on that topic. So since we last met, we spent a lot of work in finessing and bringing that product to a position where we can now launch year 2. CAMS, I just want to touch a little bit on CAMS, similar to CYPCC. I think this is one of the ones that's taking quite a lot of our time in relation to service development, looking at demand and capacity, generally recommissioning provision. You'll see in there that we talk about a self-assessment survey that are underway, but we're also completing a demand and capacity review at the moment around the CAMS space, jointly with the Council and East and North Herts and all the providers that sit within the CAMS board. I happen to chair for the county, but it is very much a joint piece of work. So we will aim to bring, we know we've started to see some of the outputs of that. We'll bring that back in November of the initial learning, but in essence we're working too much towards recommissioning an entirely integrated service provision that moves up and down pathways between providers, that responds to what is undoubtedly one of our biggest challenges around demand, with effectively a 30% increase in referrals, which is not unusual for the East. In the East of England, that is a figure that people are seeing regionally. So there are a number of areas underway that we have to respond to in relation to CAMS at the moment. One is the update of our transformation plan, which also has to be submitted nationally before we meet again next time, plus also there are some joint targeted area inspections which are going to be carried out. We are not on the list at the moment to be inspected, but we're doing a self-assessment review anyway in preparation for what will be an inspection that will probably take place certainly within the next couple of years. So a huge amount of work in that space. And then similarly with urgent care, again another demand-led area that we're seeing significantly increased this year and even in August compared to August last year. So an area of constant focus for the team. We are in the process, as we've talked about before, of just finalising the contractual arrangements around the Urgent Treatment Centre at Watford, which is a significant development which we see as a huge game changer, I suppose, in relation to how emergency care is accessed at Watford. The timeline for the mobilisation of that service is the 1st of April, so it will be after winter, but that is still having delivered that at some speed. So there's a lot of work also been happening in the outside in the provider space. We've done a number of events, culminating in quite a large event, which was the transformation, effective resource management processes and pathways and development of all those, conference effectively that we held since we last met at the end of July. And I think it was to start to enact some of the thinking more around the enhanced effective resource management scheme, which is part of year 2 of the ECF, but also part of our local delivery plans, and how the system as a whole starts to think about how they manage demand and look after patients closer to home, and flow up and down pathways as needed. So again, a lot of work going in urgent care across the team. Not least, I can't underestimate that as of Tuesday next week we mobilise CLCH's community, the contract with CLCH and the adult community services. So that we made the decision on the 17th of January, so it doesn't seem that long ago, but actually it was. So 9 months ago. So, and I have to say it has been 9 months worth of work. So it was the right decision to actually ensure that we had that length of time for mobilisation. So as we sit here at the moment, the Oversight Committee that still meets as a subcommittee of the board fortnightly, we took the view that we would only have one more meeting post-mobilisation, because we were assured that all mobilisation was on track. So as a board, we believe we're in that position, plus also we know that CLCH also are in that position, and we have passed the go live state, so we will, all organisations will be proceeding ahead on Tuesday. Clearly there will be changes, and as in any service there will be things that we will need to iron out and resolve, but as we sit here at the moment, there aren't any particular risks that give us cause for concern that will delay any mobilisation, but we're obviously doing it on a countdown basis of some of the things that we've still got to resolve before Tuesday, but any issues that we still have remaining are being managed and mitigated. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on some of the HR processes. We are going to come on to the staff survey a little bit later on anyway. But I do want to just note that we have an appraisal compliance rate of 99%, which is quite phenomenal. I'm not saying that it should be 100%, but it is actually. But in reality, to ensure that everybody's had a good quality appraisal and the paperwork has been submitted, and actually we're focused on talent management and development and everything else that goes with that, is quite a undertaking. And everybody in the whole of the organisation has played their part in doing that. So we're just finishing off the final ones that need to come in, mainly due to annual leave rather than anything else. But actually, that's a significant difference from where we are. And I know across the system, significantly higher than in other organisations. We'll talk about the staff survey later, but we've also got some of the other things that we've been doing over the summer, including the RES requirements, which we have submitted in line with the national timelines. Plus also we've run a summer work placement scheme this year, which is the first time we've ever done it, so members of so people, particularly graduate trainees or graduates I should say, all in the middle of their university have come and worked with the CCG and done some work supporting some of the work as a placement schemes. So we've encouraged staff to put forward people. So that's the first time we've done that, but I think it's been relatively successful. And one thing that we would probably encourage in the future. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Questions? Yeah, Trevor.
Just a couple of real observations, really, I think, on the primary care part. One is, obviously, you mentioned the stuff on developing pharmacists. Just, I suppose, looking forward, there are going to be other members of the multidisciplinary workforce coming to primary care. So I suppose it's worth considering doing that for paramedics or physicians associates, that kind of stuff. So that was just a sort of comment, really. And then the other one is also a comment, really. Obviously, the PCN agenda is accelerating and is quite exciting, and I think it is obviously going to be the way forward. So certainly some of our managers and our practices are feeling stressed by it in terms of the workload, and obviously it's good to see that we've put in there support for these networks, because obviously with new contracts and things going to the networks, that they do feel a bit under pressure. So very important, just emphasising really the importance of the support side.
Did you want to come back on
Yeah,
that?
just to reassure you, we fully recognise there's a lot of support and development to be done, and as these new roles come on, but we're also behind the scenes trying to support PCNs by making offers to them. So already with the physicians associates, we've looked for expressions of interest, and we've put those practices in line with the university. But then obviously we'll look at what support and development do they need. One of the other options we've discussed at the STP workforce group is then starting to work with East on the development of paramedics. How can we get paramedics working in PCNs that are rotating to keep all their clinical skills up, that benefits both parties? We have advised the practice managers of a national NHSC practice management development programme, but we are going to look at that as well, because we have got STP funding for the management support, so we will take that forward. So recognising that each work stream that comes on board is going to need support and development to make sure it's a success.
Can I just say, Lynn, I mean, I think that you never be complacent on these things, but I think it has been recognised at Region that we are doing a lot in this respect, and so much so that I know that when I spoke to Anne Radmore, who's obviously head of Region, that we are certainly going to be invited to actually sort of share some of our experiences with others across the region, which I think is phenomenal, and I think we should really be proud of what we're trying to do. I thought the pharmacist evening, I did organise it, was absolutely amazing, and I think that if we can do that for all of the different professional groups and support them professionally and educationally, which is exactly your point, Trevor, I think that will be a great basis for the change in care and bringing it closer to home in the future. So, yeah. So thank you particularly, Lynn, to you, Elizabeth, Daniel, and the rest of your teams. Any other questions? Yeah.
Again, sorry, it's about the PCNs. I think we are doing quite a lot compared to other CCGs, but there is still, amongst the PCN clinical directors, there is still a feeling that we are not being as proactive as we could be. I think nationally, PMA just yesterday launched their services for PCNs, and if we could help PCN clinical directors and their managers even if it is a signposting, to attend those meetings, then they will hear it from national perspective as well, so that then it is not just CCG asking them to do things, it is a national direction, so it doesn't come across as CCG wants A or B, C, it is just that we are following the national direction where things are going. I think that would be a lot more productive.
Yeah, actually, I can assure you we are doing that, ASIF. So we have signposted all the practice managers to the NHSE development programme that's taking place in London. We've also asked our clinical directors if they would like to attend a meeting with Anne Radmore to feed back their experience of that. And we know we've got to keep doing more and look wider than just the CCG, but we are committed to that programme, so we will keep developing it. The next PCN Clinical Directors event is on the 17th of October. So again, we will keep putting these in the diary, and we will always be talking to them, consulting with them on what their needs are, so that we get the programme right, because we know there's a national programme, but actually we want also a generic programme and a tailored programme for individual directors.
Can I just also come back on that? So I think that's a really important point, but I think Lynn has sort of certainly and team addressing that. But there is also the fact that each of our PCNs are part of a system. They'll be part of our, future ICP. They'll be part of our, locality delivery plans. And so it's really important that, as well as the national knowledge, that we also make sure that we concentrate on the delivery of the plans that I know I'm sure we'll be discussing in passing throughout the day. So I just wanted to make that point really, that it is, it's got a number of different bits to it, different streams to it, of which the national bit, of course, is part of it. Okay, any other questions? Okay, it's done to order to sign. There we are. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we move on now to item 8, which is the BAF. Rod, I think you're going to introduce it. I would just like to point out that we're being asked to review the BAF, of course, to position as agreed by the exec. Note the BAF assurance summary in Appendix 1, and I think, not trying to steal your thunder, but the one proposed change is in BAF 3.4, the risk that we're unable to manage satisfactorily all transformation, quality, communication, finance requirements during the mobilisation of the new community service contract. The current store has been reduced to 9 because, as Catherine's already talked about, all work streams are on track, and the Oversight Group Board approved the post-go-live PMO approach on the 13th of September. So I think that is, so at that point, over to Rod. Yeah.
I'm not sure, Chair, I need to say any more than that. I think you've covered it perfectly. But just to emphasise that, I guess, that both Exec and SLT are reviewing the BAF on an ongoing basis, along with the Corporate Risk Register. And just to say, there's no proposed changes to the Corporate Risk Register, but that one risk, Nicholas, that you alluded to earlier on. I don't think I'll say any more, and just open it up for discussion, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, Daniel.
The BAF 3.2b about capacity for GP practices, primary care networks. I'm still a little bit concerned about capacity, particularly around estates, potentially, with the shift in work that seems to be occurring not only proactively from the CCG into the community, but also through the long-term plan aspirations. So, how can we be assured that, there is the capacity, not just in terms of people, and workforce, but in terms of estates, and is this risk reflective of that?
Yeah. I think Paul's next. Yeah.
Would anyone want to ask David's question first?
Yep. Sorry, Lynn.
Is it just primary care estates?
I think it said, well, in 3.2b, it seems to be suggesting capacity for GP practice, primary care networks and federations to deliver the transformation of care in West Hertfordshire. So I think that the risk is around sort of the primary care.
So we do have all our primary care estates mapped already. We've had that for a number of years, and that's where we prioritise where premises need development, new premises. But obviously the change in the pace at which PCNs have come in means that we've got to look at not just practice premises that we can use, but actually other community premises that we can use. And there is an STP strategy group, estate strategy group, that reviews that, and we also have an internal strategy group to review that. And I think it's a key point, but I think we could pick that up with Sue Fogden to make sure so we have got our plans robust.
So in October, so there has been a development for this. So we've mapped across all the local plans. We've mapped across, and as part of the estates group that sits actually in the west of Herts that links into the STP estates group, we've prepared a draft estate strategy which is coming through the CCG governance structures in October, will then come to board in November. It doesn't just look at primary care estates, it does touch on what Lynn's just discussed, which is, community estates that goes alongside that and how that might work. Clearly there's a wider hospitals estate and the SOC, but I think what we've got in here reflects where we are at the moment. And then probably as we go through that process of finalising that estate strategy, we can update them accordingly. We are in the process also of taking that document through the district councils and gaining all of their involvement and engagement. And as we know, there were a number of primary care estate plans that were agreed at Primary Care Committee last week. Now, it's a difficult ask because in all scenarios, like in this locality, we struggle to find sites. So it isn't always as easy as just creating. The opportunities for new sites is quite restrictive. So, but I think there is more that we can do, which is why we've developed that estate strategy to try and develop what will be the look, and align all of those pieces together. So if you take David's area, then what are all the community services that are coming out, and where do they need to be positioned, and what would that look like? So we're trying to join up all those dots, and that's will be part of the conversation we have in October and November.
Okay, I think anything else on that point before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, just underlining that, I think that the estates is so important, because certainly in a couple of events I've been at in the last couple of weeks, one of the issues with the public and the community services that sometimes they are being sent to other bases that aren't particularly local to them. So I think that bit about having capacity for community services is really important.
Yeah. So I think that sometimes gets mixed and lost in view. So on the website we clearly identify all the sites that are available for community services. There are 2 in each locality. And actually people are given a choice. So they may say if you're offered an appointment, it may well be, if you're in Dacorum for instance, actually the closest one might be in Hertsmere, but you don't have to choose that. You could pick a Dacorum appointment. But sometimes then that's perceived as we're offered a choice that's not local. So there's that one thing. The other thing that is mentioned, which is also mentioned at the AGM, is how do we use the hospital estates to deliver the community services. So one of the things of actually only the other day asked Avenue team just to map out what we can do to improve that. So particularly in Hemel, for instance. But we are dependent obviously on Watford having the capacity to do it. So in some cases they do, and some there is more to work on, and also it may not necessarily be Monday to Friday, it might be Saturday and Sunday, which is also an option. But it's something that's very live, and we're trying to improve at the moment.
Okay. Paul.
I was just really thinking about the result. I mean, I think it's I think the work that Kate has done in putting sort of structure around this and the discipline, I think has really improved the sort of the quality of the review of the risks and things. One thing I just wanted to pick up on, a number of the risks quite reasonably have a target risk that's out beyond the current year, and in some cases several years out. I'm not quite sure what the process is going to be to make sure that they don't get lost as we move forward into the brave new world of ICSs and IC other things and STPs and everything else. That those risks and the actions of the plan to mitigate those risks aren't just somehow forgotten and absorbed. So I think there does need to be some sort of, firstly across the 3 CCGs, maybe some sort of mapping, something that takes it further, so that we understand that the mitigation actions that are in place remain properly resourced, remain properly focused on actually making sure that we deliver the stuff here. So that was the first point I wanted to make. The other one was more of a sort of, the other thing about the structure around this is we're looking at we're looking at Q2 proposals. So ACS mobilisation, I mean, in your report we said it's happening on Tuesday kind of thing. So in my mind that's kind of stopped, it's not a risk anymore, we should put a line through that because we're now into business as usual and it's an issue and it's either happening or it's not happening and we're managing it. So just in terms of keeping it live, I would expect next time around that's presumably gone. But I think the first point was the one I really wanted to make, is that picking up the future year stuff and somehow making sure we don't lose those and lose the focus on them as we move forward.
Could I just add something?
There's also an ICP issue, so I think when we talk about where do things belong, those risks, it may well be that some of them will actually sit in the ICP rather than actually at a CCG level and an STP level. Yeah. Sorry.
I agree, because you don't want to lose the local element of it,
Yes.
because otherwise it'll become meaningless if you do it at that larger scale.
Sorry, and the only other thing I would say was also I would encourage the team to think really hard to flush out what the risks are of going forward into the integration as well, because there's nothing really around that on here, but I suspect it isn't just a complete straight easy canter through the rack of things. So I think we do need to have a sort of a brainstorm about what are the risks that need to be managed as we go through this process and make sure we've got them logged down and the actions against it.
Okay. Very, very helpful, Paul. Okay, anything else on Paul's point before I move on? I think it was Kate. No, Kate, what you no?
Not on Paul's point.
No, but did you not have a point? Yes, sorry. Yeah, over to you.
Sorry, I just wanted to raise the 4.3 risk that we do not achieve financial balance in 1920. It stayed the same Q1, Q2. Are we predicting that it should stay the same until we know, or is that a risk that should move up and down?
Should move up and down.
Or down, hopefully.
So our current risk score is 12. So it is retrospective, so Paul's point is right. So this is the formal BAF report. We do update it obviously and we'll bring it back on a quarterly basis. So it always feels slightly behind. The target risk score is 4 and we do believe we'll be out there at the end of 1920. Clearly we're going through the busiest period actually for pressure around that. So at this point in the year it would be too early to move that score, I would suggest, but there's no reason to believe as we sit at the moment, and we'll go on to that in the finance report, why that wouldn't be achieved, all being equal. But the unknown is the unknown, is the difficult bit. So, but yeah, no, we believe that that score will be achieved, hence as it's reported here.
Okay, thank you. Jill? No, Rami.
Well, it wasn't me.
Oh, you didn't want? Oh, right. then I think it's Rami. Okay.
I'm just a little bit questioning 3.4 with regards to the target risk score for the mobilisation. Is that because we assume that everything will go okay with no hiccups? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so Rami, that's the target risk score. We're only now 4 days away, not including today, from mobilisation and the weekend. So we think that we've got all of the risks and plans and mitigations in place. So as a target, that's where we're always aspiring to land this one as perfectly as possible. So I think it is a target risk score we should have.
But come Tuesday, it's not a risk anymore.
No, it becomes a delivery risk. Yeah.
I would
just like to, I think it's a really important point though, but I think when you're talking about the risk, the staff who will be tupied over in the localities, many of them I think, or some of the senior management are actually coming in over the weekend to actually make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible, which I really would like to highlight, because I think it's fantastic that we've ended up in a situation where they're so motivated and really want to make it really the best transition they can possibly do for patients. So I really would like to sort of highlight that.
Okay, who's next? I'll do the science again. Okay, so we were being... Sorry, so we're just being asked to note and approve. So reviewing the BAF and note the BAF assurance summary at Appendix 1. So I had to have the board's agreement or approval for that. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, now move on to item 9, and Catherine's going to introduce this. Yeah.
Okay, so I referred to it a little bit earlier, but this is the formal proposal. It's probably still, it won't be the final paper yet that we sign off, because we wanted to take discussion and feed any further final views in before, as we talked about, we bring that back in October and into November. But in reality, this is our case for change, which is a joint board paper that's going to all our constituent stakeholder boards. So those being they are listed, but effectively County Council, ourselves, Watford, CLCH, HCT, and HBFT. Yeah. So those are effectively the main key stakeholders that are part of this discussion. But clearly, they aren't the only people that sit within the delivery vehicle, of which you'll see in this plan around the programme of work that's underway in order to enact this. So we've got actually in the paper the live plans referred to around the local delivery plans. They talk about who's responsible for what to bring it to life. So put some context around it. And actually those clearly include then our wider GP federations. Clearly they include hospices, the voluntary sector, they include urgent care, HUC, and so forth. So it is an East of England ambulance. So there's a wider network of provision, but predominantly our key stakeholders are those that I've listed. So this document itself is sort of a final draft of where we have got to. There are a number of things that we're going to ask the board to do today, but before I just go into those, I think it's important to know that what we've tried to do is take from an approach of where we look at population health groups and then identify clinically what is the right pathways and approach that we might take, and ultimately allow that to lead the form, not the other way round. So, and you can see that process detailed in there. We're about to start on CAMS, which I've referred to earlier, but ultimately that's one of our second biggest delivery areas that we need to focus on, and in that, children's transformation that sits with it. So, and it's not to say that those two, that will be the end point, because it won't be, but ultimately complex patients, frail and elderly patients are our first cohort, which, as we know, you can see in there, consume at least over 40% of our budget, and a key area that drives demand and the management of demand across our system. There are some, so we will continue to take that approach clinically. There are governance structures already in place that are starting to work this way. Clearly there's a lot more to do in relation to develop those further. You could take the BAF as an example of how you would want to see that develop. So how do those strategic risks become managed within those governance regimes? We're not at that point yet, but we do have the strategic chief execs group. We already do have also the local delivery board below it, and we also have the clinical advisory group. So effectively those are already in train and are developing, and actually our part of the plan here is to, as you can see, will be to enhance those, create effectively what will be new governance structures, terms of reference and everything else that goes with that, as we move very much into the shadow period of running, before we would gain approval of our regulators to move into an integrated care alliance as part of the integrated care system work. I just want to draw everybody's attention therefore to page 6, which tries to describe the milestones that we will undertake between now and April 2022, well, effectively April 2021, but into April 2022. So if you think about here and now, our approach at the moment is to agree the priority groups that I've just talked about for service transformation. All organisations sign off the LDP plans, and I know that the MOU agreement is underway at the moment and is going around everybody and all stakeholders to sign off. We start to agree what the leadership and governance arrangements are. We obviously have been talking about earlier about the PCNs and the OD support that goes within that, but also their interface and how we develop that interface with this. But then also, which we will bring back to the board, but is going through the Finance Committee and discussions with the Trust at the moment, the minimum income contract agreed between ourselves and Watford, which is absolutely seen as a major game changer in the way that we work towards more capitated budgets across our system. Principles of that have been agreed. We're working through the finite details and documenting how that will work to take through approval processes with the Finance Committee and then ultimately the boards. So this sort of gives you a view of what we're talking about at the moment, and hopefully it will start to fit. This all should start to fit together and make sense around all the other programmes of work that I referred to in my CEO report. You can then see we start to talk about implementation of those, how the longer term management of that minimum income guarantee will roll out, how the delivery of the frailty work at PCN level with the mobilisation of CRCH and all of their specification requirements throughout the next 3 to 6 months. And then as we move into April 2020, much more formal arrangements around population groups and integrated in pathways and implementation across all 4 localities. Underpinning this has got to be a huge OD programme, as organisational development programme. That won't be just our organisation, it'll be all organisations, and we are in the process. I'm about to run out of power, which isn't helpful. I've got a lead, just not a plug. Anyway, we actually are doing a survey with all the staff at the moment to try and understand quite what that means. We have had a number of development sessions supported and facilitated, and we're just working at what that final product will be. I think there'll be some work that we'll do in a stage 1, ultimately with some of the groups with hospitals first, so particularly, for example, around BI, finance contracting, and a different way of working, we're on a minimum income guarantee, but also then as we broaden that out operationally into the local delivery groups, and they do have a work stream around OD sitting in their plans. And so we shouldn't underestimate that that's absolutely essential, because unless you give people the tools in order to be able to make these changes and the cultural shift, then ultimately none of this will be possible, because it is a significantly different way of working that we do have at the moment. So I could go on with all those deliverables, but I think it's quite important for people. That page sort of starts to bring to life what it will mean and when, and hopefully people will be familiar with that. But I just want to really just note what we're going to be asking the board to approve today. So to note and put any final comments on this as a draft paper. So there will be a final paper come, but we're trying to gain everybody's views publicly around actually the final stages. There's been a lot of work to get to this point. You should be familiar with most of it anyway, but actually as we develop the final product for launch, that we've gained everybody's stakeholders' views more formally in their public boards. Confirm our commitment to the development of an integrated care partnership for the West of Herts. So that's another thing, agreement and approval for today. To understand and note what we're trying to do in the timelines that I've just referred to in page 6. To agree the governance arrangements, although we are going to do more detailed work on the terms of reference and work programme. You know, what does that mean, and when you take the bath is a very good example of what we just referred to earlier. How will that be managed? So all of that work has to be done, but the proposed arrangements that sit in the document. We'll be quite keen to understand what people believe are the key questions to answer that we should work forward, and actually the Chief Exec's meet tomorrow, and we'll be taking some of those further forward, and that will underpin how we work together in the future. There will be a development working group which will actually be the directors that sit below that. They will be the engine room that drive forward the aims and objectives of the ICP, and all organisations are represented, so that be at David's level and sitting there. In that, we're also going to identify the resources that are needed. It's not a side of the desk job. This is we will need to create some system roles here in order to be able to act this. Some of those will be temporary. Some of them would actually be more particularly how the CCG roles, I would suspect, morph into more of these roles as CCG structures changed initially. The OD programme I've referred to, and the support for the approach that we've got documented in Hein isn't here today. He's east and north this morning, will be with us later on. But actually, you can see the approach that we've taken and that we start to commence that immediately. And then finally, to note that we've agreed in principle to a minimum income contract, that is the chairs and the chief execs, and to move away from PBR, the details of which will go through the relevant governance processes. So I'll stop there, and then there's a lot to digest in relation to the move forward, but and people will be familiar with the document itself.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, Rami.
I'm just questioning whether to get an ICP to work effectively, we should have something in there about a clinical committee or clinical arrangements where clinicians across specialties have to come together and understand pathways and buy into pathways. When I'm trying to do the cancer reviews at the moment, it is very, very difficult to get clinical leads in the specific areas to take ownership of those particular areas. I just wonder whether that's something missing from the ICP.
Danny, was there anything on that point before I come back to Rami?
I think so, because reading through it, I suppose maybe even in page 10 might be one of the pages to look at this. I would still want to see that the principles of clinical leadership and public and patient engagement really clearly expressed as the core sort of strategic principles in this. And then from that, if we if that's an agreement, then you actually can build, well, what does that look like? And partly that's the engagement of clinical leadership across the system, where it really is, designed, especially pathways and things that have clinical implication, is really heavily designed and led by clinicians in the system. So I really feel that's not shining through as a clear principle, and I think we should really hang a hat on that as a system.
So I think just to come back on that, so just directly to answer your question, Rami, I would say that exactly the example that you've given would sit within the Integrated Clinical and Care Advisory Group, which so far has met twice and has agreed that it will concentrate on two main areas over the first year, but not exclusively. The first being elderly and care and frailty, the second being children and young people, including clearly CAMS, mental health, etc. But as it develops, it will need to develop, work on things such as cancer and other clinical priority areas. So that's how I would envisage that happening. Maybe the paper needs to make that even clearer, would be my observation, because that's clearly not coming out, otherwise you wouldn't have asked the question. Okay, yeah, back to Daniel. So
does this group feel like it's sort of influencing, or is it sort of leading?
So with the narrative we use, which maybe we need to be more explicit on, is it's the engine room of change, of the transformation. So it should be that it's leading. So that's my personal view. If we're not, I don't think that's any different to what the ICAG is trying to do and what the trust believe. But maybe we need to be more explicit around precisely how that will work and what it means. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think was it Paul and Ben? Yeah.
So on page 20, on the section on delegation and delegating stuff to the ICP, the first paragraph, I think I agree with it completely. I think it would be helpful to be even more explicit about how the assurance needs to come back, because a clear process of delegation, clear accountability, tick both those boxes, and clear assurance processes. Because from that, I'm not sure what I would see in the audit committee that would enable me to say, yeah, I know sure that the IC, whatever it is ICP, is doing what it's supposed to do on behalf of the CCG. I think we just something a little bit more explicit around the need for assurance post-delegation, rather than just at the time.
Yeah, okay, that's very helpful. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
About Rami's point and also Daniel, I think clinical pathways is a good place to start. But the financial system at the moment, the way the hospitals and GPs and everybody else get the payments, unless that is changed, the clinical pathways on its own is going to be very difficult to be understood. Last time we met with West Herts and we discussed what AGM's contract is. That was an eye-opener for them. Unless we agree on the payment structure, the clinical pathway is going to be very bland and not progressing, because everybody thinks, this is my job, I'm doing this. Unless we say, this is a financial standing going, in 2 years' time, this is what we will be working on, the clinical pathway is not going to develop.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So ultimately, there is a very good evidence that if you haven't solved the money in the way that you're describing, the other stuff doesn't work. So actually, we've been working on the minimum income guarantee now for about 4 or 5 months together. We are almost there. And actually, what it does is it's good, mature systems that have got to that position. It's moved the language on enormously that allows what you're talking about clinically to happen as a result. So I think it's a very important first milestone in delivering. Hence why it's in the first bucket by the 1st of October.
Can I come back on that? And we know there are ICPs who are already developed and ahead of us. Is that possible for board members and hospital teams to go there and see, like what we had done for our board developments a couple of days ago, to go and see a live system operating, and maybe first hand, and then come back and have input in the clinical pathways and the financial?
I think that's a good idea, actually. So as the management team have already had the box system, the Suffolk system in, so execs and also our senior leadership team have done both presentations, been a number of site visits. Across the ICS, the chairs and chief execs have had firmly in that system, but there is absolutely no reason why we can't facilitate that more broadly for the board to go visit, and I think that's a really good idea. But we should continue to see what's going on elsewhere and how we can replicate good ideas.
Okay, thank you. Jill?
If I could say that I think the paper as a whole is very well written and will be welcome for the principles, the vision that is here. But of course it will be judged by its delivery. And I think the public are not really interested in the details of the finances or the structures. They're interested in what is delivered and the quality thereof. I think they are interested in the principles behind it, things like clinical leadership. I think they do see it as being very important. So I think the public would want to see the local voice maintained, the clinical voice maintained, and the voice of the patient. And I don't feel the voice of the patient comes out very strongly in this document. And I don't know whether there's a way to make that a bit stronger, but I think the local, the clinical, and the patient are things which really matter to the public.
Okay, really important to hear that, Daniel.
So it's just picking up to make sure we don't lose these points. So I do think that high up in the document we should bring these principles out and make them really explicit and clear, unless we are perhaps the only people in the system that believe in these principles. So, because I don't, we've said this many times now, and I haven't really, although the document itself is better and it reads well, there's a lot of principles, a lot of vision there, but there's sort of clarity in the first few pages about this is the founding principles. I'd like to see that, and are we committing to actually trying to get that into this document?
Okay, fine. I think it was Stuart.
I'm not losing
next.
it, I'm writing it.
No,
This is really, really helpful. Stuart next, I think, then Trevor. Yeah.
Just following on from what Asif was saying, really, there's clearly other organisations ahead of us in terms of best practice, what's going on already. I actually was looking at the chart on page 21, the Hammersmith and Fulham Community Independent Service, and that's an integration of social services and the NHS. Is that the way forward as far as we're concerned? That's the sort of model?
It's just an example, Stuart. It doesn't,
What have we got out there in best practice other organisations? Have you mentioned a few other CCGs or organisations already there?
So all we've tried to do is just give some examples
Yeah.
of other ways. And then we've also tried to show in here what our current example is, which is the local delivery plans around frailty and complex patients. So as we go through each stage and each pathway and everything else, we will absolutely what I would call horizon scan. The Suffolk and the Buck systems we actually had in to help the staff internally think about what it feels like to be in an integrated care alliance and what the governance arrangement's like. How does it feel like if you're working in an integrated care provider? And it was more from a staff perspective, to be honest, and a manager helping leading through change. So I would suggest, so I think the idea is a really good one, and we probably need to determine, so what is it we want to see? What do we want to see evidence of happening? And it may vary now versus 12 months versus 18 months. I think we should kid ourselves, though, is there are only a handful of accelerator sites. I think it's 10, if I remember correctly. And then there are, out of 44 that is, we are in Hertfordshire and West Essex on an accelerator status now to move to shadow ICS and ICPs by 2021. So in that we will have access to resources, not money, but people and expertise to help us deliver this change. And that includes the ICS as well as our ICP. So one example is the Friendly Health System was an example that was used to try and come and help chairs and chief execs. There is a non-exec development day on the 14th of October. That's another example which is bringing some principles of what's been done elsewhere, and I know Thelma's referred to that several times, that there's lots of best practice we can take. So I think for all of these different steps and all of these different plans that we've got to enact in here, we'll constantly look and see what's the right approach and see what's done and see what we can mirror and shape and take and apply locally.
Okay, I'm going to Paul to quickly come back on that.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to endorse that, but I mean, it's because it's really important that as this isn't just that we're going from an A to Z thing. There's lots of things as we go where we'll find out some stuff is working, but also just as important, some stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it's not just about best practice, actually, it's about avoiding mistakes that other people are making. You learn as much from failure, more sometimes, than you do from success. I think I absolutely endorse what we're doing, because it needs to be.
Yeah, and ultimately, there is very little written down.
Yeah.
There isn't the legislation in place either.
Confuse things.
And also, and the long-term plan is only really clear around CCG structures. It's very limited around ICP, ICA structures, whatever acronym people are using. So, which is why also the OD programme is important, because the how is almost people give them the skills that they need to do to work differently is probably important as where we get to in the delivery, and it will definitely evolve. We had a long conversation at the Chief Executive's Development Day on this across the stakeholder groups in our ICP around, is this a change or is this an evolution? And actually it's both. And it depends on what the product, what we're talking about. So we'll have to continue to learn and have our horizon scanning views, as well as really ultimately owning our own destiny in how we want this to work.
David, you want to come on that too?
Yeah, just really on this point, to concur with what Catherine said, is that this, as many structure charts and pathways we can follow, this is mostly all about relationships as well, and it's about how we move from the different roles of commissioner, provider, and blend that together. And actually, I can't emphasize enough how much that is about trust, relationships. And we've talked about it at delivery board that our delivery right at the front line probably already does a lot of this stuff, and it's the stuff around the system that manages it that needs to kind of change to enable that to be even more improved. Because actually, there's already clinicians, there's already social workers, there's already nurses that are working in an integrated way. But actually our system doesn't enable them actually to deliver that as well. So the conversation we need to do alongside this is make sure that we bring everybody using the same language, the same terminology, and working with some of their boundaries blended in so that we get the best efficiency. So the conversation that Rami brought up around wanting to talk to other clinicians within the cancer pathway, that's relational, that's relationships. We just need to make sure that our structures don't block that from happening, but actually continue to make that even more an opportunity to benefit from.
Yes, I think, again, the document is very good in terms of laying out the future, I think. And I suppose the points I just wanted to briefly make were, one, it's quite complicated, and therefore we need to somehow distill it into a format that we can communicate both to our members and to the public. I think that's really important. Secondly, I suppose, just going back on David's point really is, I mean, as it stands now, in discussion with our partners, how much on the same page are they? So that would be the other thing. Thirdly, I suppose, just going back to the general point about clinical views being sort of weighted, I suppose, not only in the principal sort of stage that Daniel was describing, but also somewhere in the governance. I think we need to make sure that's put in there, that, you know, how the clinical advice will be used.
It's advice or leadership?
Well, yeah, the clinical leadership. So it's about teasing that out in the government. So those are my three little points, really.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Velma.
Just to follow up on what's been said, I do think what would help me, because my brain is very simple, is if we have a map actually that's set up, because there are lots of all these bodies involved, including you've got the locality, you've got the PCA, you've got the federation, all that. To actually see it visually, I think would be really helpful, certainly for me, and also to, you know, if you want to explain it to someone, I have to understand it myself. In terms of the point David made about really is bringing people together, because we already doing some of that, working in an integrated manner. I think it's more significant, what we're moving towards is much more significant, because it's a whole system integration, especially if we get down to having a single management, having a CCG. So it will not just be a group of people working together, clinicians, as they're doing now. It's the whole system, which is a major change. So when Catherine, when you say, is it evolution and change? Yes, it's a bit of both. It's evolution leading to change, sort of major change. And I have some questions, because it's all interlinked. This paper links to the next one we're going to be talking about, you know, because we also have to think about, you know, the statutory responsibilities we have. And I have a question to ask later about the legal basis for all this, because for me that's always the starting point.
I think I'd just reflect that if we go back to a lot of the paperwork and the images that we used in Your Care, Your Future, and although some of the language of integration has changed, they were incredibly powerful. And I think it would be a great shame not to lose that. I don't think we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel to come up with the principles and I think the sort of plan on a page bit, which is really what I think everybody is desperate for. So I think that's been really very clearly expressed around this board this morning. Yeah, Trevor, then Paul.
Yeah, I agree. And just going back on the communication front, I think one of the key groups we need to get to are the PCN clinical directors, because they need to understand how they sort of connect, you know, the primary care networks to the delivery board and the ICP.
So I agree with that, Trevor, but actually I think if you're a trust consultant, they also need to understand how they connect. So I don't think it is just PCNs actually, but yeah, one of the things, clearly this is a strategic strategy document. Visually, what does this mean for a patient and a GP or a consultant or physiotherapist or anybody needs writing? Probably the map might be a little bit spaghetti at the moment because the legislation doesn't support this actually. So, and that ambiguity is going to exist until either primary or secondary legislation comes through at some point when everything else has stopped being discussed nationally. So however, legally, that's where we are. We'll need to work out how therefore assurance is gained within the statutory governance powers and responsibilities that we've got now in this. But what we want to do is try and, in the launch, describe in a simple way what this will mean differently to patients. Which can be absolutely, we'd hope, but maybe hasn't come across enough, that is in line line with the principles for Your Care, Your Future. So we can enhance that. So that would be the aim. Is not, in essence, really for this absolutely this document is a public document, but to try and translate this into something that means something for a clinician and a patient.
So we had an ICS leaders, chief execs, chairs meeting last week. Chris Ham was there from the King's Fund. So I co-presented with Christine the sort of first part of our ICP. Now the question I had from Chris Ham, which I have to be honest, I don't think I answered very well at all, because I think it was on the spot. But his challenge was, so Mrs. X walking down the high street in Watford High Street, what does your ICP mean for her? And I think that's the questions we've really got to articulate.
Yeah.
Which is what we did with Your Care, Your Future.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's a lot of detail still to come, and we have to accept that. And then we have to time the information going out to work with what detail comes in. I think that's the issue. Just on detail, just because we've mentioned it a couple of times, Your Care, Your Future, we're doing ourselves down because these are very old figures in terms of our dementia diagnosis. They're not picturing there. And it just looks like we're not doing very well when actually we have progressed a long way since 42% on dementia diagnosis.
We are over 70%. So very good point.
So maybe those figures just need updating.
Thank you, Trevor. Always rely on you to make sure that we get to those back. Paul?
Just a couple of quick ones. I think on the legislative thing, I assume it means that what we're doing is not illegal, but it might be unlawful at some stage. So I think these things work these days. Yeah, I like to be told.
That's not a board view.
No, it's just anything can happen in the law. The other one, just on the relationship and trust thing. I understand the need for relationship building and trust and stuff, but it doesn't always work in difficult situations, and we're always in difficult situations when resources are constrained. So as we develop a model, we need to war game, if that's not an offensive term as well, what we would do if things don't work.
Yes.
And so that we understand that the processes can also work in a confrontational situation, because there will be times when it gets like that. That's the reality of it.
So perhaps not using the word confrontation and war games. What we would do, one of the next things we have already acknowledged we need to do. So what happens when it doesn't work? What do we do, and how do the governance structures support that? So ultimately, those are more important than actually the opposite, actually immunity. So we are minded we need to do that.
I think one of the things that has been a determination of this board, and I hope in the actions that we have done over the last, since our inception as a CCG, is actually, as Jill said, the absolute priority of the patient voice and the patient views, and co-creating some of the things that we do. It's significant that so many things that we've commissioned, we've often and always actually brought patient voice and patient experience into the dialogue, into the discussions. And we've also been really, really clear about making sure that clinical voice is there. But I don't think we can take for granted that that is necessarily something which is being heard at an ICS level. It doesn't mean that it's not equally people feel as strongly as us, but I think that narrative not only needs to be there for our ICP, it also needs to be there for our ICS. And I think at the moment that is something which really does need to be worked on, is my observation. Okay, I didn't mean to stun you into silence. Any other points? So does it help, Catherine, maybe just to go back to those points? Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Because I'm not sure we've answered some of the questions of what you put, so maybe if I just work through those,
please.
if that's all right.
So, no, that's fine.
Now I've got power.
You always get power, Catherine.
Shall I read them out?
Okay. No. It's fine, when we work paperless, you forget actually you still need power. Right, so I think, note and comments on the draft paper. We will get a final paper, but we're getting all the board's views, so we will continue to work on that. Confirm our commitment to the organisation's development of an ICP for the West of Herts. The board happy with that? Note the strategic milestones set out on page 6 and commit the organisation to supporting the delivery. Is everybody comfortable?
Yeah, I've just got one quick point, which was about on page 6. So on the commence the OD programme for the next wave priority cohorts by April 2021. Is that what is meant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because the OD programme is starting earlier anyways.
Yeah, well it is. It initiates at the end of December.
That's right.
But that's a gap of 15 months.
No, because it's in 2020 as well, and then 2021.
For next wave priority cohorts.
So
speaking
So
English.
outside CAMS and frailty. So
Fine.
what are the next set of clinical changes?
So
we'd have an OD. So
sorry,
for example,
we've
got an OD programme for frailty underway, mapped into local delivery plans at the moment that we want.
So can we just be a little bit more specific about what that meant, because I wasn't quite clear, and it suddenly occurred to me. Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, so that's fine. Yep.
Any other comments on page 6? Everybody happy? Okay. Note the agreed proposed governance arrangements subject to the more detailed work to finalise terms of reference work programmes. I'd probably add to that and assurance around delegated responsibilities. Is that okay? Confirm the questions to answer. That will ensure clarity regarding our ICP vision and aims and the principles that will underpin how we work together. So I've got patient engagement, clinical leadership, and as the main areas in here. I think that we've got something obviously around, just come out notes then around horizon scanning and obviously then the governance of how all this work together, plus also what happens when things don't work. So is there any other key areas that people feel we ought to work on?
Just so that we can make it clear when we're feeding back, it is, as you said, it is clinical leadership across the entire system, not just sitting in hospital or primary care. It is across everything.
Yeah.
And it's clinical and care. I think that probably does need to be a bit stronger.
Okay. Is there any other questions that people, key questions to answer that, obviously clearly the management team will take forward to further expand on at this stage? Clearly we're going to have lots to do. Okay. To note the proposal to establish a development working group, which is that group that I've just referred to, that will report into the partnership board and to how best to organise ourselves. So that's quite a management ask, but I'm assuming people are comfortable that that approach is okay for now. Yeah. To identify resources, you're happy that we start that work. It is actually on the Chief Exec's agenda for tomorrow around the LDP. And I suppose that we will bring back for the next iteration the proposed appointments, but our aim will be is that those will be system posts, and we'll work that through. So we're not saying to you at the moment it will be these posts, but effectively that ask will be needed. Yeah. Rami?
Does any of this require membership support? We're giving board support here. Does any of this require our members to support this? And does any of this link into a single CCG?
Yeah. So I think that is a question. I think we did take it to the forum. Obviously, it's not the first time we've talked about it in the forum. I think explaining it in a way that making a difference to a practicing GP is quite difficult. But what I would say is I don't think any of our members can say they haven't heard from us about the direction of travel and what's happening, and we're trying to help lead them through this change. Clearly a joint CCG and a merger proposal would require membership consultation. So I suggest that we continue to, as we form further thinking on what this practically means down on the ground, we do continue to update our members either at the locality meetings and the forums, and as we're getting to more decision points, so the CCG merger would be a really good example, then actually we would take that out to membership, absolutely, for voting, and that is planned anyway. But that timescale for that is not actually until probably this time next year in 2020.
Can I don't know if you've all been aware, but I think in Stoke, the 6 CCGs there have rejected.
That was the merger.
A merger, yeah. That's different to this.
Yeah.
I think ICP is a separate issue from that.
Yeah. So the merger definitely would have to go out. Yep. Yeah. I think that is different to this. This is about, and it is also clear in the LTP what we're long-term plan what we're required to do. So, but I don't think we should stop engaging with the membership around the changes that are coming. Architecture.
Yeah, my view is that I think we need to start this as a gradual process and not drip rather than a big bang.
Yeah.
Because if we have a big bang, we know what happened with the ECF. We went for a big bang, we had some pushback. I think we need to get them to understand that altogether, not together these two things, but we do need their support for this to progress.
Yeah. So do we not feel we've done that? Do we feel we absolutely must continue to do it? So we do talk about the locality meetings. Obviously, we did it at the GP Forum again the week before last, which is not. We have done that 2 or 3 times. So we would continue with that approach. Is everybody happy with that?
In our locality yesterday.
Yeah.
It's all on the agenda.
Yeah. Okay. Are you okay with that, Rami? Yep.
Sorry, on that.
Asim.
I think we have been sort of discussing this in LMGs for our locality at least every time, but still, if you ask a GP lead for each practice, the understanding is that it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect us. And I don't know what else we can do to make sure they understand that it is something to do with them. That's what Rami's pointing to. Yes.
So I think if you're a trust consultant, they would say the same thing.
Exactly.
So I don't think the challenge is any different, which is what we said earlier, isn't it? Is we have to try and get to a point where we can describe what it means for a practicing clinician, whatever you are, and a practicing care worker, and also a patient. So that's our ultimate challenge. There'll be some clinical directors who are interested in, and some TPs that are more interested in this strategic paper. Some that will take the messages that we come and we build on in the locality meetings and the membership meetings. But we can't continue to stop to talk about this. This is very important.
So we probably do need to be clearer about what is business, what will be reconvened. I think we have everybody around the table. Yeah. Good. Okay. So we're going to move on now to the performance report. Di, you're going to introduce it. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Actually, the performance report that you've got in your pack is the one that we saw at the performance committee last month, and we're on the cusp of sending out the performance report for the performance committee next week. So what I'm going to talk to you about is some of the later updates that we know from the pack that you've got in front of you. Except that the one I've got is the draft one because it was still being finalised today. So I don't have the complete picture for the June data, but where I have got it, I'll share it with you. So if I take you through page by page, one of the things that we have established with the performance report to the performance committee every month is a rolling programme of reporting on our community providers. So rather than the pack getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we bring providers online, we have agreed that we will report them on a cycle. So I don't have any update on the local providers, community providers in the pack, only on the main providers. So I'll take you through some of the key areas. So 4-hour performance remains challenging, but we have seen some improvement in June in A&E performance at West Herts from 79.9 to 82.1. So probably not what we would expect to see in spring and summer months, but we have seen some improvement. There is an A&E improvement plan which is currently with NHSI, and once approved by NHSI is going to be shared with us by the Trust, so we'll be able to report on the actions in place to get West Herts to a better position. In terms of RTT, again, June has shown a slight improvement to 86.9 in the overall performance for the CCG. Although that's the performance across the CCG, actually that improvement is based on the improvement that we're seeing at West Herts. Again, they have developed an RTT improvement plan, and that again is with NHSI, so we'll be seeing that in the coming days, or at least next week, hopefully. So we should be able to report on more information by the performance committee next on to cancer performance. Not unable to report an improved position, unfortunately, in cancer. So we actually have seen a worsened position in the June data, increasing to 5 areas that are non-compliant. We actually have a deep dive next week at the Performance Committee and Policy Committee, where we will be looking at cancer plans for West Herts, and we have West Herts coming to that meeting. So we should be able to see more detail on their intentions to improve that performance. I will take you then to Huck. So in the report it states that we were waiting for an assurance statement in relation to the impact that expanding the service to cover West Essex would have. We have received that now and met with the other CCGs to agree that we feel assured about that, and we can provide more detail on that if you need it. We do feel confident that that gives us the assurance we need. In terms of the out of hours assurance, we are still seeing fluctuating performance. So there was an improvement in the urgent home visits within 2 hours in the June data from the May data. The routine visits within 6 hours are slightly deteriorated, so it does seem to fluctuate quite considerably. We do recognise that is in the main due to problems in the GP rota fill during June, and there have been daily meetings to look at addressing those rota gaps between management and resource team in Huck. In terms of MSK, so the Connect performance, we're still seeing fluctuating performance again with this provider. So we've seen some improvement in some of the local quality requirements, but some others have deteriorated. But in the main, over the year, we are seeing a steady increase, and as you're all aware, we have done the reconciliation and rebasing work with Connect, which hopefully should see some significant improvements over the next couple of months. There's a performance improvement plan in place that is being robustly scrutinised. In terms of Millbrook, again, we continue to see some challenges with performance, and those are not significantly different in June from May. A demand and capacity plan has been developed and is being scrutinised, and there are regular CPM meetings in place to oversee the performance. In terms of mental health, Catherine already noted on the CAMS work, so I won't go into that again. But I think what's important to note is where the reds are, the actual West Hertfordshire performance is generally better than the Hertfordshire-wide performance. We had a deep dive at the last Performance and Quality Committee, and a commitment from HCT and HPFT to work towards the target of 95% for the 28-day access by March 2020. On to non-emergency patient transport, again still continues to be challenged. The picture doesn't look dramatically different to the June data to what you're looking at in May. We did have some challenges in the last month where one of the subcontracted providers went into administration, which caused some challenges. I think East's response was very positive to that and maintained the service throughout that. We have been doing, as a consortium of CCGs, a review of the key performance indicators. It's generally felt that they were very challenging to meet, and they actually didn't mirror other CCGs' KPIs, so they are being revised and being hopefully much more achievable, but still very patient-centred. That takes me to the end of the things that I wanted to share with you that I knew that you did. Let's take any questions.
Kate, let's do it.
It's not so much a question as more of a statement. When I've had patients who haven't been collected for their outpatient appointment, and they've been waiting 5, sometimes 6 months to be seen in outpatients, and then because of cancellations and things, they get put back another 3 months. They don't get booked into the next clinic. The next available clinic can then be another 3 or 4 months away. So the impact on patients actually is dramatic when for no reason of their own they miss an outpatient appointment because of transport. And you just always, I think, need to bear that in mind. I've got one particular patient who was waiting a long time for her outpatient appointment, and now she's got to wait another 3 months to go see them, which is disappointing.
I think what I would say is where we have had challenges of capacity, obviously we've had to prioritise what are the key things like discharging patients and keeping the patient flow, and obviously also the renal patients. So I take your point that our patients, when outpatients is obviously the lower priority, but I think what would be useful is if you can report that through the quality alert system and pick up those things and take them back to East through the contract meetings.
So I suppose my comeback would be, is there anything that we can do to try and make sure that when those patients are then rebooked into a clinic, that they are prioritised rather than that they're put into the same queue as somebody who's a new patient booked into a clinic?
Yeah, that was my understanding, that they would be, but so I think it would be helpful if you've got examples where that isn't happening, that we can then pick up operationally.
Yeah, all then Trevor. So thank you. Useful steer for some of the stuff that we'll talk about in more detail next week at the performance committee, which Stuart will be chairing, of course. Since just a request, actually. I'm not sure if it's to Diane or Rob, but for the deep dive for the cancer, could you possibly ensure that the meeting request and the papers, meeting request goes to performance committee members, and that the papers go to the performance committee folder, because otherwise we won't be able to get access into it.
Absolutely, I've already noted that with Sandra days ago, because I recognise that didn't happen last
Yeah, because it's still not in my diary, that's all. So there's no meeting notice come out yet to the performance committee. That's all.
So the papers are coming out today, so we'll make sure they're with that.
Yeah, well that would trigger me to put it in my diary for sure, but earlier warning is always good.
It's always the first Thursday of the month, Paul.
Yeah. We don't always have deep dives then.
We do every month we have a deep dive.
Okay, well then in that case, if the papers can go in the performance committee folder as well, then we can get to them.
Actually, what I have asked is that we realign the performance committee invites so that they cross with the quality committee. So perhaps Rob, we can take that away as an action for the corporate team.
Just briefly on West Herts, I mean, obviously, I think we should sort of be positive about their cancer figures, which are better than the other trusts, and they're doing quite well on that. I suppose my query is, I mean, obviously, I'm sort of cited on a lot of the West Herts stuff. There are two. One, the sort of recent decline in diagnostics, and I just don't know if there's any narrative behind that. I haven't seen any. I mean, it's not massive, but it's just not as consistent as it used to be. And then the second one is, I'm still struggling with the concept that the RTT is not being reached, even though our contract-wise our demand is a lot smaller. So I suppose I'm trying to match up that in my head if we're not. So
Yeah, so we talked about both of those yesterday actually. So this is, so you're talking about diagnostic waiting times at 99%.
yeah,
So they're not that far. They generally are over, to be fair. But actually, we were looking at, we did a contracting meeting, an activity yesterday, and there is a lot of the increase in direct access is significant. There's been quite an increase in demand, so we just need to correlate whether that is partly for a reason. So particularly around scans, that was our biggest issue. Yeah. So I don't know. We're going to find out. It only came up yesterday.
we've got community provider role.
Exactly. So we need to understand exactly what that is. So I don't know. So too early to say, but we will following that through. The second point on RT, so we can come back and prefer to understand it. But on RTT, actually the trust has gone from an 80 to an 85% RTT position now, from the start of the year to this point. So they have actually caught up significantly and continue to do so. We've still got two triple specialties, which are ENT and general surgery. So, obviously, the ENT we believe will improve for two reasons. One, because of our new ENT surgery will release capacity to just patients on the waiting list. The second one is we're still outsourcing around ENT, which we plan to do. They're also working on an outsourcing program with other acute trusts. And then general surgery, to be honest, I'm left-sided on that, but that's part of the action plans that are coming through at the moment. So we're expecting site-off, which we know has been done, an extensive on And we're seeing that in the financials as well. So
Probably just a lag, isn't it?
it is the waiting list, yeah, but we will, and they are eating through the backlog. But with the diagnostics, we'll take back and come back further.
I don't think it's West Herts actually, because in the pack, the diagnostics is overall Herts Valleys.
Okay.
I'll make sure we've got more detail for the performance committee
So it's that,
next
up
week.
until now, it was always performing now.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Rami?
I can just add a little bit. The diagnostics isn't West Herts. Diagnostics are actually scans at Mount Vernon and also some of the stuff at East and North. That's what from the figures I saw yesterday with Gemma, looking at that. And quite a lot of the miss, you'll see it in the papers that are coming for next week. I had a preview of them. A lot of the miss are actually to do with capacity in clinics and clerical capacity. We've actually looked at the WHHT figures themselves yesterday. That's coming to next week's performance committee, so you'll have a look at that.
Thank you, Izzy.
Well, in West Herts, on ICE request forms, there used to be very limited number of scans that you could request as GP, and you had to speak to a radiologist to request them. Last 2 months, they've opened up a lot more scan request forms, and CT scans, and lots of CT scans and MRIs are available there. Even MRIs. So if we go back to having more services like community services and more referrals, that will, I think, indirectly encourages requests of those tests.
well, it has. We've seen a huge spike in the last 2 months. That was the exact conversation we had yesterday, so that would be why. But
the direction was to use the MRIs. They've increased the options available there. So.
Okay, Daniel?
I'll just say on that point, yes, on that point, whilst I agree with MRIs, I think we need to be very cautious with removing access to CTs, particularly around where you suspect cancer diagnosis, because we know that our cancer sort of diagnosis and sort of lags behind other countries to some extent. So I think being able to access CTs early when you're suspecting cancer is something that we should remove. And I know we've got the pilot project, which is quite sort of a limited narrow, but I just think it's just sometimes you might use it in a way that's a bit broader than the pilot at the moment. So it really depends on why you're requesting it, is what I'm saying.
So we need, at the end of the day, we're not doing anything at the moment. We just need to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But that would help with that understanding, which literally came up yesterday. So we'll come back around further detail.
We don't want to sort of blanket response.
We don't want to make any anecdotal comments.
And some of them, some of them are sort of linked to a 2-week referral. So even though a GP may request a CT abdomen for pancreas, for example, even if you think maybe I'll do CT and then see what the result says, then you still have to do 2-week pancreas as well. So it increases the number of 2 weeks and the CTs rather than being one on its own. So yes, there's. I think I agree. Even with the national picture that we compared to other rich nations, we are still behind. Connecting them to 2. So if you've done a CT and a normal, by the time the result of the CT comes in, they're either being seen in 2-week clinic or going to be seen the next day. Cancelling them is really a waste of appointment.
Can I just come back? I mean, I think we're getting into a huge amount of detail here, which we don't. There is lots of stuff we don't know. This is clearly something. We're going back to Rami's point earlier on. It's clearly something that the ICAG needs to be really discussing. We need to discuss this as a system, and I would have thought that we should actually try and raise it and make sure it's a full agenda item at one of the ICAGs.
Well, if we need to, let's understand what the issue is first.
Exactly. But it would be part of that discussion. Sorry, Stuart.
I don't know if you'll actually have the numbers here, but on the HUC out of hours, where we're missing target surgeon home visits, put in 6 hours, it's a bit like A&E, where you expect the performance to be better this time of the year. Do we know if the volume has changed at all in numbers of visits? And are they missing it just by a few minutes, or is there a significant number of patients who are not getting calls for some significant time when expected to be within 2 hours? So if you haven't got the numbers out, can we have that for the performance report next week, so we understand what the gap is, if you like?
Okay. Can I just come back to the mental health, the routine referrals, meeting the 28-day which is?
So we're now at 79%.
Okay.
So we're seeing an increase, and it's in line with the plan that we set HPFT as a trajectory to get back to their 95%. So we're on plan.
If you're on plan.
Yeah.
Which, the end of October is the delivery date, is that right?
Yes.
And HCT is the end of January.
January. Yeah. Sure.
And do we, sorry, can I just, do we know whether that, because some of the, we do have, I think, 2 localities where the community mental health sort of offer that we're doing at the moment, is that reflected in the fact that they've been operating and that has reduced the waiting times or not?
No. So that hasn't had its full impact as it as it could have. So that should ensure an improvement in what their trajectory is to improve. So that HPFT, a bit like CAMS, got themselves into a diagnostic kind of muddle in terms of referral to treatment, then triage, and how they manage some of their appointments. They've improved that significantly for adults. And even I was sceptical at the time about how quickly they could get back to balance. But actually for adults, they're on track. CAMS is our significant risk. If we add on the delivery of the primary care mental health plans that we've got, that should hopefully give some more capacity as well. But it's not where we want to be. But if we weren't on the line of trajectory, then I would be more concerned.
Okay, but it is a big disappointment that it has taken so long, considering where we were at the beginning of the year in terms of funding this, to actually get teams operationally there. And I understand that the biggest problem was recruitment, it was workforce. But that, that's not going to go away. So, are we robbing Peter to pay Paul in order to get those workforces up? Or have we managed to get new manpower, new workforce?
New manpower.
Okay, that's helpful.
HPFT has been external resources been brought in as a sort of outsourcing program.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Another bit with it. So also around lower level, around AQP, we'll be looking at potentially bringing a paper to re-procure that process, because actually that's been capacity challenged as well. So we want to grow that as an element to our plans coming up next year.
Any other points? Okay. Right, okay, thank you very much. I think we were asked to note rather than to anything else, so thank you very much, Diane, for that. And for the clarity, I think the clarity of these reports compared to a year ago is phenomenal, actually, so thank you very much for all the hard work of the team. Okay, so we now move on to finance report, and I think Nicola, you're going to be Caroline today. Yeah,
I am.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Yeah.
I will try. So this is the finance report for month 4 for July. At the end of July, the CCG was 0.95 million underspent year to date. The 2 main areas driving that underspent were mental health, as we've just heard about, and community, which was due to a credit note for last year's activity that was reflected. The acute position is based on 3 months activity with 1 month estimated, but we're picking up about the minimum income contract with West Herts, so we're forecasting that to plan. The CCG is forecasting to return to plan by the end of the year, at break even. Any risks that have been identified at the moment have been mitigated by non-recurrent and prior year benefits. Quick performance is at 95.1%. That's been included within the forecast outturn and year-to-date position. So I'll just take any questions.
Just to comment again, I mean, of note from previous years to this year is the acute trust's award project. Probably the first time I've seen black down that corridor.
Even the London ones.
Even the London ones. What's happened in London? I don't know.
Extremely good project management.
Okay, well, I'm just, yeah.
But it's not, you don't think it's also to do with our community pathways?
Yeah, so it definitely is. So we know that the outpatient, the referrals into the London trusts are reducing, as we would expect, in line with our community pathways. We were talking about yesterday, but so the right referrals are going in, obviously. But so that is making a difference to the London ones. The London ones that we see in bumps are which, because
hoping to see in future finance committees that forecast moving up from 95.1 to closer to 3 figures, all on the left-hand side of the decimal point.
We noted that request and the pipeline scheme, as you know. So, yes, absolutely.
Okay. As you said, the lack of questions doesn't reflect the lack of detail, particularly on finance committee. So very clear. Thank you very much, Linda, for your very comfortable. Okay, I'm going to move on. There may be a slight need to take. We may need to come to because we're expecting Hein and Paul, but we may have to deal with paper without them if we get to that point. So the next one is the EU exit assurance paper. Very topical, Rod.
Indeed. So,
Which assurance can you give us, Rob?
So things are ramping up again. Sounds slightly comical to be talking about this with everything that's happening, but we were at a regional workshop, a few of us last week, which was, we had Professor Keith Willett presenting as the national lead on EU exit for the NHS. And we were told in no uncertain terms that we should continue to expect a no-deal Brexit, no-deal EU exit on the 31st of October. Of course, things have changed again. Things have been happening this week. Whether that changes that, who knows? I think all of us are a little bit flummoxed as to where this is going, but we have to plan for a no-deal exit on the 31st of October. The paper is intended to provide the board with assurance that we have plans and mitigations in place. We've not included the whole spreadsheet, which is an additional 20 pages, which you're welcome to review if you want to. That will give you additional assurance. We submitted an assurance document to NHS England a few weeks ago, and that covered similar areas to which we were covering earlier in the year, but there were some additions because clearly some work had been taking place at national level around some additional areas, such as food shortages in our providers and GP registrations with potential nationals returning to the UK because they can't get care where they're living in Spain or wherever. So those have been some additional areas of assurance we've had to provide. I think generally preparations are good. We've followed the national template, we've followed the national guidance to the letter. If there are gaps for us, it's probably around care homes and getting assurance from care homes that mitigations are in place. Some of them have not really engaged with us, so we've continued to push that and continued to attempt to get the responses we need. I suppose what's different, and this came across at the regional workshop last week, what is different compared to when we went through this in March and April, was that at that time we were leaving winter, whereas now we're entering winter, which introduces a slightly different, well, a very different perspective with all the pressures that includes. A couple of more things to say. We've been asked to put together an EU exit team, which you'll see in the paper we've done. So these are the subject matter experts that we can go to if we need rapid pieces of work and rapid assurance on areas. And we also will be implementing a specific director on-call rota in addition to the standard on-call rota very soon. I'm happy to take any questions as long as you're not asking me to tell you what's going to happen. No.
Well, I think it's as good as you can do with the information available. I suppose the figure that sticks out to me is 76% admitted company. Yeah. It's a bit of a worry.
Obviously, there's had been a government release around medicines that have got to patients, predictions around what to do, what not to do, which is very much business as usual. Stockpiles for minimum 6 weeks. Everybody should carry on and not overorder. So that's the official line.
Which is okay. The medicine did used to go
in some of the impacts. I mean, there's big problems at the moment with medicine shortages.
Yeah.
But that's for different reasons.
Potentially, yes.
And obviously there's the nationally publicised. That's shortage generally rather than actually the.
So I think we note the assurance about medicines.
Yeah.
But we as GPs know that at the moment the shortages which we are nationally we're being made clear it's not due to Brexit concern, but it's taken an enormous amount of time, both for pharmacists, patients and for GP surgeries. That bit has really escalated over the last 6 months, and I think that is, it is what it is, but it is a real concern for me.
Is that something that's written on our risk register, or is it something that's someone else's problem?
What shortage of medicine?
It is on
It's on
one of our risk registers. It's just not as far off as the BAF. So
Yeah.
I suppose it's debatable. Does it have the importance to put that far up? That's a discussion point, I think.
I think it fits into other risks like capacity, primary care, and I suppose community pharmacy as well. Because if you're dealing with that, I mean, there are mitigations already in place. There's sort of policies that are being created. You know, the pharmacists, for example, who are under tremendous strain anyway, should be providing alternatives to general practice. So just things that can smooth the ride, and that's sort of what you can do in terms of mitigation.
Andy?
We've raised the medicine shortages before and emailed Sarah Crotty about developing a CCG-wide approach to it, working with pharmacists. Some pharmacists, unfortunately, are using the system. If they don't have supply of specific medicine, even though it's not a national shortage, they're asking GPs to provide something different so that they can issue it. So it's escalating the problem rather than helping the problem. So I think we need an approach to help everybody here.
I know the policy documents have been drawn up, and the LPC, the local pharmacy committee, are really working with community pharmacists to say, you know, really they should be providing the name of an alternative. But we do have to recognise they are finding it, you know, they're finding them under a lot of pressure dealing with these as well.
Okay, so we were asked to note. So unless there's any other questions, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Roy, for that. But we now move on to the next paper, which will also get your name against it, Roy. Okay, you're a busy man. Okay.
Not the diary piece. Again, this one is, I guess I'm presenting on behalf of Caroline actually for this and the previous one. So annually we go through a process of self-assessment against NHS England's core standards, which actually do change from year to year, so it's not as if we're completing the same list every year, so it does involve quite a lot of assessment internally. And we've assessed ourselves as substantially compliant. That will be tested by NHS England with a peer review a little further down the line. And the paper also provides, because we do exercise our plans on a regular basis, it provides some feedback on the outcomes of those exercises that have taken place during the year. I'm not sure I really wanted to say much more than that, Chair.
Any comments? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next is communications and engagement.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Well, what I suggest, if it's okay, I'm going to take, because Heine's not here yet, Juliet is obviously on leave at the moment, and the staff, so I'm going to take all those 3 items together, because I think they all do really sit together related
Okay.
to what we're doing generally more broadly around comms and engagement, if everybody's okay with that, take that approach. So perhaps I'll start, if I can, with the RES report, because I think that feeds, highlights in particular some of the things that we're focusing on with the staff survey report, and then obviously in the comms and engagement. So this is the second time we've submitted a workforce race and equality standard report, and we're now mandated to do it, but we did it last year anyway as well. And Paul and Hein, the team has spent a lot of time on this. Actually, it isn't just increasing user expect in the NHS. There's a lot of discussion about inclusion, quality,
equality, diversity, and quite rightly so, but particularly actually also at senior levels, versus necessarily at the workforce. And are all organisations representative of the residents that they serve and look after, but also if you're a provider of your workforce? So the board will note that actually as a organisation, and this links to the report that's in here, we actually are more representative of across the BME community than we are actually of our population, and actually significantly more, and continue to do so. There has been a reduction, and we have to include ourselves in this, on representation in bands 8 to 9. You'll see in the data that's come through. That's just as a result of changes rather than anything else. But actually we are, as you can see in the data, overrepresented in more junior bands. And if you link to the staff survey report, one of the things that particularly surprised us in the outcomes of the staff survey report, and also although there's some great things in the staff survey report, and I won't repeat what's in there and highlight some of the things that the staff say about and continue to say about the organisation. One of the things that surprised us the most was about perceptions of discrimination around equality of progression in particular, and were people in BME community unable to access the same sort of promotion within the organisation. We were quite surprised about that, because then if you refer to our res data, actually in essence the BME community are actually accessing more non-mandatory training and CPD training. So it didn't all quite fit together. We were quite unsure, in fairness, as an executive team. So we have done a lot of work, which is what Juliet works for with the SIG, which is part of her comms work and engagement work. We've also done a lot of work with the SLT and also with the execs to try and understand what else we can do. We have debated and talked about having specific sessions around dedicated SIG groups which focus on the BME community, and actually how we might encourage them to represent their views, that we can, if there are issues, how we address that further. Actually that isn't taken up, interestingly enough. So one of the things that we've talked about at the moment is actually, do we get some external support in to come and rather than the organisation itself doing it, whether we actually have some external support in to come and talk to people who want to be involved in this, because at the end of the day we can't mandate people are. So it's a difficult balance actually, and sometimes the data across the reports doesn't really stack up. But what you've got in both the res and also the staff survey is effectively what we've done, which is an amalgamation. We have sat the two very closely together of a suite of actions that have been agreed and discussed at our staff conference in July, our SIG group, the executives and the SLT, quite a lot of which are underway, some of which the board will already be aware of, for example the bullying and harassment pledges, which is obviously a national NHS approach, which we have taken on board. So there's a whole suite of things and delivery dates that sit behind there, which we fundamentally believe all sit together, and there isn't one approach that addresses some of the things that are clearly an issue for our staff that we need to resolve and work on. So I'm hoping that people can see the evidence that's in there around the action plans of what we're going to do, what we are doing, and similarly in the staff survey on what we have done, or the staff have said they would like us to do, and how we're enacting that currently. I think the other thing I would also say is the dynamics and the culture of the organisation has changed in the move to the new offices. It feels very different in that respect. So it will be interesting to see how, when the staff survey starts, Ian's not here at the moment, but it is coming out shortly. It normally runs from about October to December, so a lot of this work is continuous. How obviously the flexible working and the different way of working that we now have encouraged and have enacted as part of that move feels different to the staff. So actually getting the champions back together again just to talk about, okay, what else is there that they'd like us to do, how do they feel, and there are still some niggly bits that need to be sorted out. So execs still sorting out phones, for instance. We're trying some different phones for the CHC team who take patient calls, and it is quite noisy when you're there, if you've noticed. So sometimes that, if you're dialing in, you can hear it. So some of those things, those dynamics, we need to continue to work on. So I could go through all the bits that we have to sort out on a day-to-day basis that still bother people, but also I think it's a good opportunity to temperature test how the culture feels different. So it does feel different, you know, even from my perspective, the way we're all very much out in the office all the time now, that will feel different to the staff. You know, there'll be a different dynamic that will come through. So anyway, so I've tried to bundle all three together really, which I think reflect, because they are all fit together, we do see them as moving all of that way. So I hope that's okay to approach
So
it.
that's fine, we just need to be, but the res needs to be approved.
We do need to approve our submission,
okay.
yeah.
Can I just ask, so I think it's really welcome the staff engagement in reviewing. I think I don't feel that we've done is actually reviewed as a board about those working relation things and how it's affected our roles. So I think it would be useful to actually do, that's the only sort of addition I would sort of make to what is, I think, an excellent piece of work. So I don't know what other people feel about that, but I think it is the right time to be just reviewing how we all work, and you know, I think that's just to complete the picture really. Nods, yeah, okay. But tremendous lot of work. That's be honest. It's absolutely tremendous.
So the feedback generally is very positive. I think our res data shows that we have areas to still address. So it's really helpful to have this reporting in this way. So it's a positive thing. You know, only on Tuesday, I was at the Accelerated Development Directors Programme, which we're in our cohort 4. So the people who were there, Lynn was on that last year, as long as 2 other members of staff. We've got 2 members of staff on it this year. And actually we had a very long debate around equality and diversity inclusion in that programme as well. So the conversation is very well embedded in a lot of HR and OD programme, rightly so, that we're trying to work with at very senior management levels and also regionally. So an important job, and I think as an organisation we're also using the opportunity to make sure that we do the same.
Okay, so thank you, Catherine. Any questions or points? Yeah, Paul.
I think the results are really interesting. I think the rest of the stuff is really good. The action plan looks really solid. I can see most of the stuff is actually happening. Just picking up on a couple of areas in the survey that you've identified as being for improvement, and I can see there's a lot of actions against it. Health and well-being is a real concern, that so many people are sort of coming to work despite not feeling well enough. That's nearly 2/3, over half the organisation, which is an awful lot. And on the bullying and harassment, again, that's really high. Again, actions plan. Have we, in going through the sort of the staff involvement groups, I assume that's the only time when you pick up sort of verbatims from people on what they were thinking about when they actually answer the surveys, and that therefore the actions are actually relevant to addressing those, because otherwise it's just a sort of scattergun thing.
Yeah. So we debate these 2 inland, as you would imagine. So we were quite surprised about the health and wellbeing one, in reality. There were changes in the way responsibility of that and whether that was part of it. But actually we've taken that on board. We've talked to the staff about it, and we've actually used the opportunity with the district council to do things more jointly together around it. So it will be also interesting to see how that plays out, bearing in mind we're also encouraging health and wellbeing around working from home more as well. So we've taken a number of actions, yeah, I think that's right. And actually, like the bullying and harassment one, which is a national issue, all organisations debate it. We have talked quite openly about, for 2 years running now, we've had dedicated sessions with the staff at staff a variance of response in teams, which we also look at. And actually the questions are very specific and they vary per organisation. There's a lot of work done around how the questions are asked and whether they're relevant for non-facing, patient-facing versus patient-facing, commissioners and providers. That has also a big dynamic in it. So you can't ever not look at the data and say you excuse it for that. What you do is try to understand it also. And then we target our interventions. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to, with particular teams, for instance, where there may well be more middle management development areas around what is it, how do you manage performance in your team, how do you support individuals who may be struggling, and what does that mean for both parties, and also the difference between what is performance management and what is also bullying. So there isn't one thing that drives it, but we work through a variety of different questioning, understanding, and time away with the staff. So those teams have had dedicated development days, supported, facilitated, and actually I think as an organisation we've done a lot in that space in the last 12 months. We try and have as many open, honest conversations with people as we can to make sure it's a conversation that's welcomed and supported to address it, and work with the staff to improve either perceptions or otherwise.
Daniel? Sorry,
Did
you want to come back on that? Sorry, if I go.
I only wanted to add something about the people coming into work sick.
Yes.
Although that isn't, I mean, we don't want to see that. I think actually, when knowing from my team, I will quite often say to people, what on earth are you doing? You can go home. And it is actually their commitment and not wanting to let their colleagues down that brings them in. So it's a really tricky one to balance. I don't think people think, well, perhaps I'm under an illusion, but I don't think people think that we are putting pressure on people to come into work.
No, I think I just answered the question.
And it's a very literal answer, isn't it? So,
Yes.
and then what you do is also we then take into account that actually, such a high proportion of staff really look forward to coming to work and would recommend it a place to be. So you have to look at it in the whole concept.
It's too attractive, so they come in and they're not
It's lovely at work. And the only other thing I would say around the health and well-being, that we recognise that our figures were really low a couple of years ago. We went on a massive drive, and actually you saw our figures fly through the roof. And I think there is a bit of a norming thing around the health and well-being now, because I don't think we've dramatically changed what we do for staff, but it's almost expected now, whereas it was quite a big thing 2 years ago. So I'm not resting on our models, but just a bit of perspective.
Yeah. Daniel?
I would just say, just follow up on the bullying and harassment. So the actions Catherine was talking about make sense. I suppose they're not sort of mentioned so much in the actions in the report, so I wondered if some of that needs to sort of come out and be formally sort of noted, so we can sort of look again and see whether we've implemented that.
What, sorry?
So the actions we're talking about, the bullying and harassment list.
Yeah, we're on page 292 and 293 of the pack.
292. Yeah, I was looking at that.
Are you looking at the RES stuff? Are you looking at the RES report or the staff survey?
The staff survey.
Yeah, so the actions are on page 293.
Yeah, and I just wondered if all those actions you were talking about, the bullying and harassment, are really coming through in the actions written down. I wasn't sure that I could see that there. That's all. Unless I'm missing them.
So we've got, specifically we have to stop the out bullying, it goes to the harassment messages on screen.
Yeah, that's the only one I could see.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's the only one I could see. You sort of listed quite a lot of sort of quite reasonably robust strategies to tackle that, but that's the only one I could see in there. But I thought it was an important area.
So I suppose, I'm linking it also to the RES one, which is on page 285 and 286, that's the RES report. But if you feel it's not enough, we can be more explicit. Don't forget, we have taken the bullying and harassment pledge here to the board and signed up, and it's visible in the office. So, and actually that appears on all the screensavers as well. But if you feel that that's not detailed enough in combination of those two, then we can.
Or that it's referencing another sort of policy that we have. Yeah, perhaps.
I thought
we have obviously the staff conference was the main place that we did this, but yeah, we have done that.
I would encourage others actually to, I mean, I have done the directors' breakfasts, and I'm sure it'll be in my diary for October, whatever. But it would be really good, and I think appreciated, if other members of the board were to consider doing that, because I think it is about bringing the cohesiveness of us as a board to our workforce. So I don't know if we can actually instigate that and come up with some suggestions. I would have thought that's a programme that will be over the next 3 months. At a time of great change for our workforce, it would be nice to be in touch with them.
Yeah, so we'll be a bit more explicit around those actions on the bullying then, and because the values workshops are all linked to that as well, and all staff are mandated to attend those. So, and then we do so the directors' breakfasts continue. We do them on a monthly basis, so they're just a rolling programme.
Okay, great.
But we'd welcome other people.
Yeah, I think it would be really good.
We could invite the board to join in now as well if they wanted.
Well, that's
Feel
a-
they wanted to
Well,
do
that
their
might
own.
be a bit more joined up. Yeah, okay, I like that idea. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
We would like what we are doing for CMCH start date, like dates that you could say this is the date that a board member should come to that day.
We can circulate them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, that's very good.
Okay, we'll have that.
Okay, any other comments on those 3 items? So we've got 2 for approval, so I said 1. So the comms engagement report was for assurance. Work the RES, item 16, is for approval. So are we happy to approve? I'm assured in terms of the approval for that. And then the staff survey action plan, which is for noting but also for approval.
Well, it's approval of only actions, but
Yeah.
we'll be taking the feedback then from
Okay.
the down phases.
Okay, fine. And if we can just apologise for the fact that Paul and
Yeah,
I were not able to be there, because
I've
I
sent
know
the
it would have
dates
been
out.
very... No, okay, well that's good to hear, because there's a lot of work gone into this, and I wouldn't want them to feel... No, absolutely, that they were they were very self-explanatory. So, yeah, okay. Okay, fine, thank you very much. Right, review of conflicts of interest and how they were managed in the meeting. I don't think we had any. No, okay, that's fine. Reflection on equality and diversity in relation to decisions.
Well, the last report was
Yes. Absolutely. Okay, and the risks, any additional risks identified or anything that we need to comment on?
Yeah, bear with me on this one. I remember anecdote time. Many years ago, a member of my team put on the risk register, there's a risk that the risk register will not be completed. So that was a bit of a cop-out. But it links, there is, we said when we were talking about the path that there is actually a risk that we lose sight of those risks. So actually, that is something we probably do need to minute. Yeah, so that was my observation.
No, I think
others.
Can I suggest that's more part of the ICP, ICS plan, around how those transition works rather than the risks to report.
It's our risk as well, isn't it? How we maintain the oversight of local performance.
I suppose also taking our workforce through that transition in the wider sense, not only those directly employed by the CCG, but also in terms of the workforce that is part of the CCG. You know, we are a member practice organisation, so that workforce, everybody's going through transition and change. So I think that is already articulated in our risks, but I think it's just important. Okay, right, any other risks? Right, so the next meeting says it's here, and I don't think it is here on the 28th of November. I'm assuming we're touring somewhere else. Do you know? You?
No, actually, I think we do have a few because we've been toured elsewhere.
Oh, okay, so we're Herts here. Fine.
Great location.
Kate and I are very happy with that.
I'm away.
Oh, you're away?
I'm on a training course.
Well, we can talk about that. We'll talk about that. Okay. Right, okay. That's it. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Stuart.
So just one thing I wanted, Diane sent me a note, and I want this so it gets recorded in the minutes. Sent me a note a week or so ago about news of one of our apprentices. You know how keen I am on our apprentices company. Our CHC apprentice has completed apprenticeship with distinction and has been nominated to Learner septicize. And I don't know how that works out in GP land as well, but I think there are some limits there. So perhaps last time give us an update next time on the workforce report, what we've got and what we plan to do on a rolling programme to bring apprentices in and give them the opportunity in the NHS.
She has also been promoted within the CCG as
Absolutely
well.
great.
That's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Okay, no, thank you, Stuart, for mentioning that. That's a really important point. Okay, so I